General Hospital spoilers revealed that Dante sat across from acting DA Dante Turner, with a kind of heaviness that didn't belong to a detective who had simply had a long day. It belonged to a man carrying the weight of too many missteps, too many doubts, too many ghosts that refused to stay buried. The room around them was quiet, almost too quiet, as though the walls themselves were leaning in, waiting for him to say the thing he had been trying not to say for days. Dante was never one to spill his thoughts without reason, but Chase had pushed him to the edge, and the reopened case surrounding Drew's shooting had pulled him even further into a maze of uncertainty he could no longer navigate alone. Turner watched him with that sharp clarity she was known for, patient yet intense, as though she already sensed the confession Dante was wrestling to contain. When Dante finally started talking, the words didn't come out as neat statements or clean observations. They came out as fragments of frustration, pieces of guilt, and the remnants of a partnership that had once been one of the strongest in the PCPD. He admitted to Turner that Chase's behavior had begun to haunt him in ways he hadn't wanted to acknowledge, that he could feel the shift in Chase long before the evidence tampering came to light, long before the argument that tore the veneer of their partnership open. Dante spoke of obsessions, the kind that start quietly, disguised as duty or loyalty, but grow into something more dangerous, something that consumes sound judgment and replaces it with tunnel vision. Chase's obsession with clearing Willow, Dante said, wasn't just misplaced dedication anymore. It was becoming a liability, a shadow stretching across every piece of evidence they touched. As he spoke, something inside Dante cracked open. He confessed that Chase's actions had forced him to confront obsessions of his own, the cases he had clung to too tightly, the justice he had tried to force into existence, the families he had tried to save even when the cost was too high. He recognized in Chase a reflection of a younger version of himself, a version Dante thought he had outgrown but now feared was resurfacing, and that terrified him. Because of Chase's fixation could cloud his judgment enough to endanger a case as serious as the shooting of Drew Kane. Dante knew it wasn't impossible that he himself might lose his objectivity as the stakes rose higher. Turner didn't interrupt. She simply listened, absorbing every detail with a precision that suggested she, too, had been carrying unease about Chase. Dante could see it in the way her jaw tightened, the way her fingers tapped rhythmically against her notebook, not in impatience, but in recognition. She wasn't just hearing Dante's confession, she was confirming her own suspicions. The case had already spiraled once because of missing footage, corrupted files, and conflicting testimonies. Now, with Chase suspended and Dante openly questioning his state of mind, Turner knew they were teetering on the edge of losing control of the narrative altogether. Dante leaned forward, lowering his voice as though someone might be listening. He admitted that the haunting feeling didn't end with Chase. The entire case felt wrong, misaligned, distorted, as though someone had planted a lie deep in the foundation, and now everything built on top of it was starting to wobble. The shooting of Drew Kane wasn't just another act of violence in Port Charles. It carried a sense of orchestration, of intention, of a mastermind operating just outside their line of sight. And Dante feared that if they didn't get ahead of it, if they didn't strip the distractions away, and face the truth hiding beneath the chaos, they were going to miss their window. Turner finally pressed him. What truth? What exactly did he think was happening? Dante exhaled a long, heavy release of air that carried the weight of every sleepless night since Drew fell. He confessed that he didn't think Chase had corrupted the footage, but he did think someone had. Someone inside. Someone who knew how to manipulate evidence without leaving obvious fingerprints. Someone who wanted suspicion to settle on Chase. Someone who wanted the investigation delayed, derailed, or misdirected long enough for the real shooter to vanish in plain sight. That possibility chilled Turner more than she let on. Dante continued, explaining that his instincts, those instincts he had spent his entire career refining, were screaming that the case was being steered by an invisible hand. Every time they got close to clarity, something shifted. Every time facts aligned, a new contradiction emerged. Every time they took a step forward, someone sabotaged the ground beneath them. Dante's voice grew lower as he admitted that this pattern, this deliberate manipulation, was starting to feel like the work of someone who understood not just police procedure, but human psychology. Someone who wanted them exhausted, distracted, divided. Someone who wanted them obsessed with the wrong things. Turner felt the weight of those words settle between them, because she understood all too well what obsession did to people she had seen it consume: lawyers, judges, defendants, victims, and now she was seeing it creep into her detectives. Chase was already wrapped in his own emotional storm. Dante was fighting not to be pulled under, and the longer the investigation dragged on, the more likely it became that both men would lose their footing entirely. Turner finally broke her silence, telling Dante that if his instincts were right, then they had no time left to waste. They needed to shift their approach. They needed to chase new truths with the same intensity Chase had chased the wrong ones. They needed to carve away every emotional distraction and confront the possibility that this wasn't a simple shooting, it was the opening move in something far larger. Dante nodded, feeling both dread and clarity sweep through him. He confessed one last truth, the hardest one of all, that the fear curling in his chest wasn't just about Chase or the missing footage or the political complications surrounding Willow's trial. The fear was that if they didn't find Drew's shooter soon, someone else in Port Charles would become the next target. Someone close, someone vulnerable, someone they wouldn't be able to save in time. That admission hit Turner harder than anything else, because she had feared the same thing. Their eyes met, and for the first time since Drew collapsed from the bullet, they felt aligned, not as a detective and a DA, not as colleagues navigating a messy case, but as the people standing at the edge of a storm that was about to break over the entire town. They needed answers. They needed speed. They needed precision. They needed to find the shooter before the shooter found someone else. And as Dante left the room, Turner could still feel the lingering chill of the confession he had unburdened. The obsessions consuming Chase were dangerous. Yes, but the new obsessions forming in the shadows were far worse. Because someone out there wasn't just hiding. Someone out there was waiting. The situation brewing around Chase had begun as a complication and unfortunate, uncomfortable bump in the case, but now it had evolved into something far more corrosive. Something dangerous enough to stain the badge of every officer in the PCPD. Dante felt the full weight of that threat pressing into him like a fist around his lungs, tightening with every new detail uncovered. The whispers around Port Charles were no longer idle speculation. They were beginning to harden into suspicion, into doubt, into a slow-growing belief that the police department was failing them again. And Dante, despite all his efforts to maintain composure, was now carrying the impossible responsibility of trying to restore a faith that no longer knew who to trust. The accusations surrounding Chase and the corrupted evidence had spread like wildfire. No matter how many times Chase insisted he had nothing to do with the missing traffic camera footage, the damage had already been done. The absence of proof was not the same as proof of innocence, not when public confidence had already been shaken by years of cover-ups, misjudgments, and haunted pasts. People in Port Charles remembered everything. They remembered the mistakes, the scandals, the tragedies. And now, with Drew's shooting reopened and the evidence disappearing at the worst possible moment, the town's faith was teetering on a thin, fraying thread. Turner, always perceptive, always strategic, had sensed that tension long before Dante admitted the truth. She could feel it in the way conversations quieted when she walked into a room, in the way officers shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, in the way bureaucratic excuses grew flimsier by the hour. Something was wrong inside the department, something deliberate, something calculated. Something that felt far more like sabotage than incompetence. Turner had not built her career on assumptions, but on instincts. And those instincts were screaming that someone was manipulating the investigation from within. So when she finally asked Dante whether he believed someone in the PCPD had tampered with the evidence, the question hung heavily in the air between them. Dante felt himself freeze, caught between loyalty and truth, between the badge he wore and the friend he had suspended. Admitting suspicion of Chase felt like betrayal. But withholding the truth felt like something far worse. He told her yes, he suspected Chase. The words came out rough, as though scraped from the inside of his chest. He clarified quickly, almost desperately, explaining that Chase's emotional entanglement with Willow had clouded his judgment, that his decisions were no longer guided by reason but by an overwhelming need to protect her. Dante insisted he didn't believe Chase was malicious, just compromised. This, he said, was why he had suspended him. Because he couldn't allow someone that emotionally involved to have access to the evidence anymore. But even as Dante spoke, he felt something crack inside him. Because the real truth was that he wasn't just afraid of Chase's lack of objectivity. He was afraid of his own. The confession pressed against his throat like a razor blade. The more complicated the case grew, the more Dante realized he was slipping down the same slope Chase had. He wanted justice, yes. He wanted the truth, yes. But he also wanted to protect the people he cared about. And that desire was beginning to distort everything. Michael's involvement was becoming impossible to ignore. The witness placing him at Drew's house wasn't just a rumor, it was a lead. A dangerous one. And Dante knew Michael was lying. Chase was lying to protect Michael. Michael was lying to protect Willow. And Dante, despite knowing better, was beginning to lie to protect all of them. Turner saw it immediately. She didn't call him out directly, but her gaze sharpened, her silence lengthened. And Dante could feel her analyzing him piece by piece, measuring the weight of every word he said. Turner was not a woman who accepted half-truths. She dissected them, traced their edges, and exposed their weaknesses. And now she was doing it to him. He felt heat creeping up the back of his neck as he admitted something he had not intended to say. That Chase's behavior had been haunting him. Not because of what Chase had done but because of what Chase reminded him of. Dante saw pieces of himself reflected in Chase's desperation, his stubborn loyalty, his unrelenting need to fix what he couldn't control. Dante had been that man once he had made a decision that put Michael behind bars as a teenager. He had believed in justice so fiercely that he hadn't realized he was destroying someone he cared about. And Michael had paid the price in ways that still clawed at Dante's conscience. Now, history was threatening to repeat itself. Dante wasn't the only one unraveling under the strain. Turner was grappling with the mounting implications of what Dante was suggesting. Internal sabotage was something she could not ignore. If someone inside the department had indeed manipulated the evidence, then nothing about the case could be trusted, not the reports, not the chain of custody, not the witness statements. Turner could feel the framework of the investigation shifting beneath her feet. Like the beginning of an earthquake, a case of this magnitude collapsing from within wasn't just a professional setback. It was a political disaster, a public scandal waiting to explode. The thought of a compromised department sickened her, but she refused to let the disgust paralyze her. She intensified her investigation, expanding her inquiry into every officer, every technician, every civilian employee who had touched the case. She began pulling personnel files, checking timestamps, reviewing access logs, studying body camera footage, looking not for mistakes, but for patterns, for deviations, for shadows where someone could hide. Turner wasn't just searching for the truth, she was hunting it. Michael's involvement added another layer of complexity, turning the investigation into a tangle of conflicting loyalties and half-revealed truths. With someone having seen him at Drew's house the night of the shooting, the timeline shifted in a way that threatened to unlock everything. And yet Michael, ever the strategist, was already working to contain the damage. Chase was covering for him out of loyalty. Willow was trying to distance herself, and Dante was caught in the middle, torn between duty and the guilt he carried like a scar. Dante tried to keep his voice level as he explained to Turner that the reopening of the case was exposing fractures in the PCPD that had been there for years. Officers who had once worked together seamlessly were now questioning each other. Partnerships were beginning to crumble. Friendships were turning into liabilities. And for the first time in his career, Dante felt like he was standing on unstable ground, unsure whether his next step would bring him closer to the truth, or push him into the path of a much larger threat. Turner could sense the emotional entanglement heightening. She could feel the pull of obsession taking root in both Chase and Dante. Chase was consumed with clearing Willow. Dante was consumed with maintaining the integrity of the investigation, while also protecting Michael. And in the middle of these warring obsessions was a shooter still at large. Someone calculating enough to manipulate evidence, smart enough to hide behind departmental chaos, and bold enough to shoot a man like Drew Kane. The realization sent a cold shiver down Turner's spine. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't an accident. This was orchestration. And the person responsible was hiding in plain sight. Turner's focus sharpened. She vowed to uncover the truth no matter where it led, no matter who it implicated. The investigation, once fragmented and chaotic, began to take a new shape under her direction. She followed the threads from Dante's confession and let them guide her deeper, into a network of lies, cover-ups, and silent alliances. Meanwhile, Dante felt the tension inside him coil tighter each day. His attempts to restore public faith in the PCPD pushed him to his limits. He attended community meetings, gave statements, reviewed protocols, spoke with officers about maintaining transparency, but still the distress grew. People wanted answers. They wanted accountability. They wanted to know who had betrayed them. And Dante, even as he tried to lead with honor, felt the creeping dread that the betrayal might be closer than anyone imagined. As Turner expanded her investigation, as Chase spiraled deeper into emotional turmoil, as Michael braced for the storm that was coming, and as Dante struggled to stay upright, under the crushing weight of responsibility, one thing became clear. The shooter hadn't just attacked Drew. The shooter had fired the first shot in a much larger game. A game of manipulation. A game of sabotage. A game of obsession. And Dante and Turner were standing at the epicenter of a storm neither of them fully understood yet. But they were getting closer to close for the shooter's comfort. And in Port Charles, whenever someone got close to the truth, the next shot was never far behind. Dante could feel the walls closing in long before he admitted it aloud. An invisible pressure tightening around every part of him, as the investigation twisted into something far darker than anything he had anticipated. What began as a simple inquiry into Chase's behavior had evolved into a sprawling nightmare, one threading itself into every corner of Port Charles and tightening its grip on everyone involved. Dante was no stranger to high-stakes cases. But this one throbbed with an eerie, suffocating energy, as if the truth itself were resisting him. Every time he peeled back a layer, another secret waited beneath it, darker, more poisonous, more deeply entangled with the people he cared about. Chase had been at the center of that growing web from the beginning, a man drowning in loyalty, fear, and unresolved guilt. Dante had sensed it weeks ago. The way Chase's eyes lingered too long, the way his voice trembled when Willow's case was mentioned, the way he seemed to unravel in small, invisible ways. But Dante never imagined what those signs were pointing toward, never realized that the shaking threads of Chase's psyche were connected to something so catastrophic that it could shatter everything the PCPD had left standing. Investigating Chase meant walking into a minefield. Dante knew that, but he didn't expect the ground to explode beneath his feet. The moment he and Turner discovered the truth, the revelation hit them with brutal force. Willow had been involved in the night Drew was shot, not as a passive bystander, not as an unlucky victim of circumstance, but as an active participant driven by a mixture of fear, instinct, and panic. That single truth changed everything. It didn't just explain Chase's erratic behavior, it illuminated it. Chase wasn't simply bending rules out of emotional attachment. He had been willing to destroy himself, destroy his badge, destroy his career to protect Willow from the consequences of a moment she never intended to spiral into a disaster. And now, with that truth rising from underneath the rubble of lies, Chase's entire world was poised to collapse in on itself. Dante felt his pulse spike as he processed it, his stomach twisting in a way he hadn't felt since the darkest cases of his career. Turner, ever composed, went still in a way that hinted not at shock, but at rapid calculation. She wasn't the type to emote visibly, but Dante saw the moment her posture stiffened, the moment her mind pivoted to crisis mode. She knew exactly what this meant, not just legally, but politically, socially, structurally. The PCPD, already hanging onto its credibility by a thread, was about to face another quake, one with aftershocks that would tear through every division. The town would erupt, families would fracture, lives would crumble. And yet, that wasn't even the worst part. The real horror was what this meant for Chase. Dante's mind flashed through the last few weeks, the desperation in Chase's voice, the frantic tone of his questions, the way his hands shook during interviews, the nights he stayed long after his shift ended, burying himself in paperwork that wasn't paperwork at all, but a frantic attempt to rearrange reality. Now it made sense. All of it. Chase wasn't covering for himself, he was covering for Willow. And that meant the guilt he carried wasn't just professional, it was personal, suffocating, corrosive. Chase had always been the kind of detective who led with his heart, sometimes to his own detriment. But this was different. This was obsession born from fear. This was the kind of devotion that hollowed a man from the inside. This was the kind of secret that crushed him, piece by piece, until he was barely functioning. Dante realized with a sharp ache in his chest that Chase had been hurting, long before the evidence tampering scandal surfaced. He had been unraveling under the weight of Willow's truth, trying desperately to stitch together a version of events that would protect her, even as the real story clawed at his conscience with every passing day. Turner saw the danger immediately. She leaned into the investigation with renewed intensity, expanding the scope beyond anything Dante expected. She reviewed files, traced timelines, pulled archived footage, examined every inconsistent word uttered in any interview connected to the case. She was relentless, a force of surgical precision tearing through the web of lies until the strands began to break apart. But with every step she took, with every layer she exposed, Dante could feel the case slipping further into madness. The deeper they went, the more the truth seemed like a living, breathing entity, something that shifted away from them every time they neared it. And then came the next blow. Someone had spotted Michael at Drew's house. That detail didn't just complicate things, it detonated the investigation. Suddenly the lies were multiplying, twisting, spiraling into something uncontrollable. Chase was protecting Willow. Willow was hiding something. Michael was lying to protect Willow. Chase was lying to protect Michael. And Dante, despite all his best efforts, was lying even to himself. He was losing objectivity, losing clarity, losing the emotional distance required to solve the case without letting it swallow him whole. Every connection he had in Port Charles felt like a vulnerability now. Every past mistake felt like a shadow reaching for him. And the more he tried to pull away, the more the case dragged him in, locking him into a psychological labyrinth where every decision carried the weight of betrayal or loyalty. Turner watched Dante lose sleep. She watched him grow quieter, sharper, more tense. She watched him bury himself in the case the way Chase had. And she didn't interfere, not because she didn't care, but because she understood that obsession was sometimes the only way to peel a truth this dangerous out of its hiding place. But the turning point came on a night Dante would never forget. A night when he and Turner pieced together Willow's timeline with a degree of precision, so unforgiving that even the smallest inconsistencies glowed like open wounds. A night when they discovered what Willow had actually done, not deliberately, not maliciously, but impulsively reacting to fear in a way that changed everything. It wasn't premeditated. It wasn't planned. But it had consequences so catastrophic that Chase took it upon himself to bury it, believing that Willow could not survive the weight of what she had done. And through that act, through that devotion, Chase destroyed himself. The moment Dante fully understood this, he felt his heart fracture. Because now he wasn't just investigating a colleague. He was preparing himself to break a man who was already breaking. He knew that confronting Chase with the truth would shatter him. Not because Chase feared punishment, but because he feared what the truth would do to Willow. That fear had been the thing eating him alive all along. Dante could see how everything was going to unravel. Chase would deny it at first. Then he would crack. Then he would collapse entirely. And Dante, who loved Chase like a brother, would be the one forcing him through that collapse. Turner's silence in the aftermath of their discovery carried the weight of inevitability. She knew they had crossed the final threshold. There was no going back. There was no undoing what they had found. The investigation would explode. The town would erupt. The department would fracture. Chase's life would be destroyed. Willow's world would be ripped apart. And through the chaos, the shooter still out there, still unseen, still calculating, would watch as everyone tore each other apart, their obsessions turning them into weapons against one another. Chase wasn't the villain. Willow wasn't the monster. Dante wasn't the betrayer. Turner wasn't the executioner. They were all victims of the same invisible hand, the same orchestrated nightmare, the same hidden force manipulating them like pieces in a game. None of them realized they were playing. And as Dante stood in the dim glow of the precinct hallway, feeling the weight of what he and Turner had uncovered pressing into his spine like a blade, he felt a new fear take hold. Not fear of the truth. Not fear of the consequences. Fear of what came next. Fear of how much further this madness would go. Fear of the shooter who had orchestrated the first domino and was waiting somewhere in the shadows. For the moment, the whole world finally collapsed. Because now Dante understood one terrible, inescapable truth: the investigation had only just begun.